chosen soul. The leaders are asking, who the fuck is this? You weren't on their radar, weren't in their circles, and weren't part of their network. You didn't come up through their system, didn't follow their path, and didn't play their game. And suddenly, you're here, making an impact, creating waves, and disrupting everything they built, controlled, and dominated for years, for decades. And they're confused and concerned, trying to figure out who you are, where you came from, and how you got here without their permission, without their approval, and without their pathway. You emerged from nowhere, at least, nowhere they were watching, nowhere they were controlling, and nowhere they could predict. And now you're a force, a presence, and a power they can't ignore, can't dismiss, and can't pretend doesn't exist. The leaders are saying, who the fuck is this? They're asking because you don't have their credentials, you didn't attend their schools, didn't earn their degrees, and didn't collect their certifications that usually qualify someone, that typically credential someone, and that normally authorize someone to do what you're doing, to have what you're having, and to be where you're being. You bypassed their gatekeeping, their credentialing, and their authorization process and went straight to the work, the impact, and the results that their credentials are supposed to guarantee, but often don't. You're producing what they promised, creating what they claimed, and delivering what they guaranteed without their system, without their process, and without their credentials. And they're trying to figure out how. Leaders are saying, who is this? Because you don't look like them, don't sound like them, and don't act like them. You're different, distinct, and other than what they expect, than what they recognize, and then what they accept as legitimate, as qualified, and as worthy of the position, of the platform, and of the power you occupy. You command, and you wield. Your difference threatens them, your distinction confuses them, and your otherness challenges them, because their power depends on sameness, conformity, and the predictability of who gets access, who gets a platform, and who gets power. You're breaking the pattern, disrupting the system, and challenging the gatekeeping just by being different. They're asking because you didn't pay your dues, didn't wait your turn, and didn't climb their ladder rung by rung, year by year, paying the price they paid, enduring the process they endured, and suffering the indignities they suffered on the way up their hierarchy, their system, and their structure. You skipped all that. You went straight to the impact, straight to the influence, and straight to the authority that they spent decades acquiring through their system, their process, and their pathway, and they're offended, confused, and threatened by your shortcut, your bypass, and your alternative route to the same destination they reached through a much longer, harder, and more painful path. Leaders are saying, who is this? Because your influence is organic, your following is authentic, and your authority is genuine. It wasn't manufactured through marketing, not created through promotion, and not bought through advertising, but earned through being, through doing, and through delivering real value, real transformation, and real results to real people who freely choose to follow, to listen, and to trust you. Not because an algorithm pushed you, not because money promoted you, and not because a system endorsed you, but because you're actually good at what you do, actually helpful with what you offer, and actually transformative in what you provide. This organic growth confuses them because their growth was manufactured. They're asking because you're not playing by their rules, not following their protocols, and not honoring their traditions that maintain their power, that preserve their control, and that protect their position. You're operating from a different rulebook, different protocols, and different traditions that they don't control, don't understand, and don't have access to. A divine rulebook, cosmic protocols, and universal traditions that supersede their human systems, their earthly structures, and their temporal traditions. You're accountable to a higher authority, operating from a greater power, and submitted to a larger purpose than their limited human hierarchies can comprehend, can control, and can contain. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because you're attracting their people, the ones they trained, they developed, and they invested in are leaving their organizations, their movements, and their systems to follow you, to learn from you, and to align with you, not because you recruited them, not because you poached them, and not because you marketed to them, but because you represent something they're hungry for, something they're seeking, and something they can't find in traditional structures, traditional leadership, and traditional systems that you offer, that you embody, and that you provide authentically, powerfully, and transformatively. They're asking because you're solving problems they couldn't solve, reaching people they couldn't reach, and creating results they couldn't create with methods they don't understand, with approaches they don't recognize, and with perspectives they don't share. You're doing what they said couldn't be done, what they claimed wasn't possible, and what they insisted required their system, their process, and their approach to accomplish. You proved them wrong, not through argument, but through demonstration, not through debate, but through results, not through criticism, but through an alternative that works better, serves better, and delivers better than their established, accepted, and traditional ways. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because you're not asking permission, not seeking approval, and not requesting authorization to do what you're doing, to be who you're being, and to create what you're creating. You're just doing it, being it, and creating it without waiting for their blessing, without needing their endorsement, and without requiring their sanction. This independence, this autonomy, and this sovereignty threaten their gatekeeping, their authority, and their control over who gets to do what you're doing, be what you're being, and create what you're creating. You're operating as if their permission isn't needed, their approval isn't required, and their authorization isn't necessary, because it isn't. They're asking because you're disrupting their business model, their revenue stream, and their profit structure. You're offering for free what they charge for, you're providing openly what they hoard, and you're sharing freely what they restrict access to through paywalls, through memberships, and through exclusive access. You're democratizing what they monopolized, liberating what they controlled, and opening what they closed to maintain their power, their profit, and their position. Your generosity threatens their scarcity, your openness challenges their exclusivity, and your freedom exposes their control as unnecessary, as exploitative, and as self-serving. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because your message is resonating deeper, wider, and faster than theirs ever did. People are responding to you, engaging with you, and transforming through you in ways, in numbers, and at a pace that took them years, decades, and lifetimes to achieve. If ever, your message isn't more sophisticated, more polished, or more professional than theirs. It's more authentic, more real, and more true. And people recognize authenticity, respond to reality, and transform through truth in ways they never respond to sophistication, polish, and professionalism that lacks substance, lacks truth, and lacks authenticity. You have what matters, what they lack. They're asking because you're not for sale, can't be bought, and won't be compromised. They've tried. They offered you money, position, platform, access, and influence, everything that usually works, that typically succeeds, and that normally compromises people into their system, into their control, and into their agenda. But you said no, walked away, and stayed independent because you value something they can't offer. You treasure something they don't have. You're committed to something they can't buy. Your integrity, your calling, your purpose, and your alignment with the divine, with truth, and with an authentic mission that no amount of money, position, or platform can purchase, can corrupt, or can compromise. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because you're operating in a power they don't understand. It's a spiritual power, divine authority, and cosmic backing that transcends human systems, earthly structures, and temporal hierarchies. They see results they can't explain, impact they can't replicate, and authority they can't manufacture through their methods, their approaches, and their systems. You're accessing something beyond their understanding, beyond their control, and beyond their ability to reproduce through human effort, human strategy, and human manipulation. You have a connection to the source and access to power and authority from heaven that makes their earthly authority look weak, their human power seem limited, and their temporal influence appear temporary. They're asking because you're changing the game, rewriting the rules, and redefining success in ways that make their game irrelevant, their rules obsolete, and their definition of success inadequate. You're not playing their game better. You're playing a different game entirely. You're not following their rules more effectively. You're operating by different rules completely. You're not achieving their version of success more fully. You're manifesting a different success altogether that makes their game, their rules, and their success look like what it often is, an empty, meaningless, and unfulfilling pursuit of things that don't actually matter. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because you're exposing their inadequacy, not intentionally, not maliciously, and not deliberately, but simply through existing, through being, and through doing what you're doing. Your presence reveals their absence, your action exposes their inaction, and your results highlight their lack of results. You're not trying to make them look bad. You're just being so good, so effective, and so impactful that, by comparison, their inadequacy becomes obvious, their limitations become clear, and their ineffectiveness becomes apparent to everyone watching, including them. They're asking because you're uniting people they divided, building bridges they burned, and creating connections they prevented through their gatekeeping, their hierarchies, and their systems that separate, that divide, and that disconnect people from each other, from resources, and from opportunities. You're creating inclusive communities, open networks, and accessible platforms that welcome everyone, that serve all, and that benefit the masses, not just the elite, not just the credentialed, and not just the connected, but everyone who shows up, who engages, and who participates. This inclusion threatens their exclusion. This openness challenges their gatekeeping. And this accessibility exposes their restriction as unnecessary, as harmful, and as wrong. Chosen soul, leaders are saying, "Who the fuck is this?" And that's your confirmation, your validation, and your verification that you're doing something right, something significant, and something threatening to the status quo, to the established order, and to traditional power structures. If leaders weren't asking who you are, you wouldn't be making an impact, creating change, or disrupting systems that need disrupting. Their question isn't an insult, it's an indicator of your effectiveness. Their confusion isn't a problem, it's proof of your emergence. Their concern isn't an obstacle, it's evidence of your power. Keep doing what you're doing, keep being who you're being, keep creating what you're creating. Let them ask, let them wonder, and let them try to figure out who you are, where you came from, and how you got here while you keep moving, keep growing, keep impacting, keep transforming, and keep disrupting everything that needs disrupting. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Answer, someone who doesn't need their permission, doesn't require their approval, and doesn't seek their authorization to do what the divine called, what the cosmic anointed, and what the universal designated them to do. That's who you are. That's where you came from. That's how you got here, through a calling, through an anointing, and through a designation that supersedes their authority, transcends their control, and exceeds their understanding. Leaders are asking, "Who is this?" Keep them asking while you keep answering through your being, through your doing, and through your impact that speaks louder than any explanation could. They're asking because you're building faster than they can understand. What took them years to build, you're manifesting in months. What required them decades to develop, you're creating in weeks. What demanded from them lifetimes to establish, you're producing in days. This acceleration, this speed, and this velocity of growth, of impact, and of manifestation confuses them, concerns them, and threatens them because it suggests their slow, methodical, and systematic approach isn't the only way, isn't the best way, and isn't the necessary way to create, to build, and to establish what you're establishing through different methods, different timing, and an entirely different approach. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because your audience is more engaged, more committed, and more transformed than theirs ever was. Your people aren't just consuming, they're participating. They aren't just watching, they're activating. They aren't just learning, they're transforming into agents, into catalysts, and into leaders themselves, creating a ripple effect, a multiplication factor, and exponential growth that their passive audiences never created, never generated, and never manifested. You're not building an audience, you're building a movement. You're not creating followers, you're creating leaders. You're not making consumers, you're making creators. This transformation, this activation, and this multiplication is what real leadership produces, what authentic authority generates, and what genuine impact creates. They're asking because you don't fit their boxes, their categories, and their definitions of what someone doing what you're doing should look like, should sound like, and should be like. You're not the industry standard, not the typical profile, and not the normal demographic for this level, this impact, and this influence. You're breaking their models, shattering their expectations, and transcending their limitations of who gets to do what you're doing, who gets to be what you're being, and who gets to have what you're having. Your existence outside their boxes challenges their categories, breaks their definitions, and proves their limitations were never real, were always artificial, and were completely unnecessary. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because your content is hitting differently, landing deeper, and sticking longer than anything they produce, they create, and they distribute. You're not more educated, more credentialed, or more qualified than them by traditional measures, but you're more connected, more authentic, and more aligned with the truth, with the source, and with what people actually need, want, and crave at a soul level. Your content isn't just information, it's transformation. It isn't just knowledge, it's activation. It isn't just teaching, it's the transmission of something beyond words, beyond concepts, and beyond information that their content lacks, that their credentials can't provide, and that their expertise doesn't include. They're asking because you're creating a culture shift, a paradigm change, and consciousness evolution, not just in individuals, but collectively, not just in followers, but broadly, not just in a niche, but massively. You're changing how people think, feel, and believe about things that matter, that shape, and that define the culture, the paradigm, and the consciousness of the masses, of the generation, and of the moment. This cultural impact, this paradigmatic influence, and this consciousness shaping is what true leaders create, what real movements generate, and what authentic revolution manifests. You're not just teaching people different information, you're helping people with a different transformation that changes everything. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because you're answering questions they're afraid to ask, addressing issues they're too comfortable to confront, and challenging systems they're too invested in to critique. You have no allegiance to their systems, no investment in their status quo, and no comfort in their compromises that keep them silent, keep them complicit, and keep them compromised in ways that prevent real truth, real challenge, and real change from emerging through their leadership, their platform, and their influence. You're free to speak the truth they can't, to challenge systems they won't, and to create change they don't, because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain from truth, from challenge, and from change. They're asking because your success isn't explainable by their metrics. Their measurements and their analytics don't capture what you're actually doing, actually creating, and actually manifesting. You're succeeding by measures they don't track, by metrics they don't value, and by standards they don't recognize. Soul transformation, consciousness elevation, and paradigm shifting can't be captured in their analytics, can't be measured by their metrics, and can't be quantified by their standards, but it's real, it's powerful, and it's transformative in ways they're measurable, trackable, and quantifiable. Success often isn't, doesn't, and can't be. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Because you're operating in the freedom they sacrificed, the authenticity they traded, and the integrity they compromised to get where they are, to have what they have, and to maintain what they maintain. They sold pieces of their soul, truth, and calling to play the game, to climb the ladder, and to gain position. You didn't, you wouldn't, and you won't trade freedom for position, trade authenticity for platform, or trade integrity for influence. You'd rather have less platform with full integrity, less influence with complete authenticity, and less position with total freedom than more of anything that requires compromising who you actually are. This choice, this commitment, and this integrity makes them uncomfortable and makes them question their own compromises. Chosen soul, leaders are saying, "Who the fuck is this?" Let them keep asking, let them keep wondering, and let them keep trying to figure you out, to categorize you, and to understand you through their limited frameworks, incomplete categories, and inadequate understanding of what's actually possible, what's actually happening, and what's actually emerging through you. You're not here to fit their boxes, to meet their expectations, or to operate within their limitations. You're here to break boxes, to shatter expectations, and to transcend limitations that kept generations small, kept masses controlled, and kept power concentrated in the hands of a few who determined who gets access, who gets a platform, and who gets power. You're disrupting all that, challenging all that, and transforming all that simply by being who you actually are, doing what you're actually called to, and creating what you're actually meant for. Leaders are asking, "Who is this?" You are the future they didn't prepare for, the change they can't control, and the movement they can't stop, because it's not about you alone. You're part of something bigger, something global, and something unstoppable, a wave of consciousness evolution, paradigm transformation, and power redistribution from the concentrated few to the empowered many, from the exclusive elite to the inclusive masses, and from restricted access to democratized opportunity. Leaders are saying, "Who is this?" Answer, the future arriving now.